Okay, great. Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Montai. I work in the International Programs and Engineering Office as the International Programs Manager. And we're here today to talk about how to book flights on a budget, my thoughts on best ways to do that, things to make sure you're doing, things to make sure you're not doing, things to make sure you're aware of, all of that we're going to hopefully cover today. Just some quick background on myself. I do have a lot of travel experience and a lot of experience doing this kind of searching and purchasing of flights. Probably my original kind of more independent travel began when I did my own study at abroad program. When I was an undergraduate, I studied in Thailand. Um, and since then, I've done a lot more travel. I've led student groups around the world. So I like to think that I have a fair amount of experience with all of this. I am definitely like the informal travel agent for my family. Whenever anyone has trip plans, they come to me and say, please find me the best deals. And I usually really enjoy doing that. Um, Most recently, I helped my sister plan a trip to Chile with her family this coming winter break. So it's something that I really enjoy doing. Like I can nerd out about this stuff for hours. Um, so yeah, this is actually a fun presentation to do, and I'm happy that all of you decided to join today. So let's jump right into it. Okay, so this is kind of what the presentation today is going to look like. We're going to start out with basics, what you need to know, where and how you want to start out searching. From there, we're going to go into a few more details about things that you definitely want to make sure you're aware of, particularly looking at layovers and different ticket types. Then we're going to have something called the Explore tool. It's a feature in Google Flights that I think is really useful, and I want to make sure that you all are aware of, and I'm going to show you how you can best utilize that. And then finally, we'll wrap up with an actual demonstration for someone's flight that they're maybe accurately searching for right now, and we can kind of see what we find, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. If you have any questions, I have the chat open on my second screen here. So feel free to interrupt me, answer any questions you have as they come in, and then you can always unmute yourself as well. So feel free. Okay, so starting out with the basics, I think it's important to understand that the pricing of flights is extremely dynamic. And what do I mean by dynamic? Dynamic, I think all of you know, means, right, it's subject to change. It can move quite a bit and quite rapidly. Um, so let me just close my door here. My cat is crying. So it can change quite a bit, and that's subject to a lot of different factors, right? So airlines are working with pretty, I believe, complex models and algorithms that are adjusting these flights and their flight costs all the time. That's going to depend on way more things than I can get into details here, but I think some of the most important things include inventory, just like how many flights there are to the destination you're hoping to travel to, what the demand for those flights are. So are the flights almost fully booked, or is there pretty low demand and they're looking to get rid of tickets? What's the timing? So like timing can be like, what time of year are we talking about? What time of day, what time of the week, all those things can factor in and impact costs. So you have to realize that there's not going to be a definite set of cut and rule tricks that I'm going to give you today that are always going to guarantee that we're locking into the best price, because it's such a complex model that the airlines are working with here to determine their pricing, that it's always going to be something that it's going to be a bit unpredictable and subject to change. So I just like to kind of preface all of this with that. It's good to know that going in. Other things I want to make sure I mention at the top here are that even though this session is called Booking Flights on a Budget, I want you to realize that it's not always going to be the absolute lowest priced itinerary that you find that's going to be your best option. And I do think a lot of the search engine tools that you can use nowadays do a pretty good job of making that clear and being transparent about the flights that you're looking at, the costs, and then all the different details that go into that flight that may make it less desirable, even though it's a cheaper ticket. And I'm going to get into more detail with that with some screen sharing in a minute, but it's good to keep that in mind. Next, I always recommend that people, if they can, if the price is relatively similar to an online travel agency, to always book directly with the airline. You're almost always going to have that option, booking directly with the airline or booking via a third-party agency like Expedia, Kayak, something like that. It's usually going to be better to book directly with the airline because if your plans do change, usually you're not going to be subject to as many rules, potential penalties, and fees if you're needing to make that change directly with the airline who you bought your ticket with instead of an online agency. Because if you buy with an online agency, not only will you have to pay any fees that the airline is charging, but you're typically going to have to pay with any fees that the agency is charging as well. Another thing to mention is usually you're going to get better service directly with the airline versus working with a third-party online agency. So as long as it's not a huge difference in price, I usually recommend going directly with the airline. And I'll show you on the flight search demo, like how you can make sure that you're going with the airline. Next, I want to talk about flexibility. So if you have flexibility in your travel plans, that's almost always going to lower your price. So not being fixed into a specific date and time, that's going to open up a lot of options. And as we'll see, there's easy ways to look at potential options if you have more flexibility. So definitely you're going to want to keep that in mind. That being said, there are a few things that you need to be aware of with opening up your flights to more flexibility. One, particularly for all of us here, if you're thinking of booking flights for a study abroad program that has a very defined date, obviously your flexibility is going to be somewhat limited. And our expectation is you're going to be arriving to your program and your destination by the designated start time. So we're not going to be allowing people to arrive 3 or 4 days late to a program just because you found a flight on that day that was a few $100s cheaper. So you're going to want to keep that in mind. You're also going to want to keep in mind on the other side of things. Let's say you do find a flight that's significantly cheaper that gets you to your program destination 2 or 3 days early. That could be an option, and we don't have any restrictions on you doing that, but you do need to factor in what might be the additional extra costs with doing that. So let's say you arrive 72 hours before the housing for your program is open to students. You will have to find a hotel or hostel for those nights where you can be staying before your program officially starts. And then you'd have to add that in to the cheaper cost of the flight and see if that still washes out as cheaper than just getting there the day you're supposed to be getting there. So you're going to want to keep that in mind. And then finally, one of the most basic things I think it's really important to be aware of is the 24-hour rule. So for those not familiar with that rule, that basically is a guarantee that if you're flying from the United States or to the United States, and you've booked your flight directly with the airline, and it's at least 7 days out from your departure, you're guaranteed to be refunded the full cost of your ticket if you cancel it within 24 hours of purchasing it. That can be a really useful tool because let's say you purchase a ticket and then the next day you realize a number of potential different things. You realize you made a mistake. You put the wrong date or airport or misspelled your name on the ticket. You could cancel it within 24 hours and be fine. Let's say you found a different ticket that next day that was actually significantly cheaper. You could buy that ticket and then cancel the initial ticket. So that can be a powerful tool to keep in mind. Make sure that you know that and kind of always have that in your back pocket as a little security. Okay, jumping into some more specific search tools and tips. So just right off the top, I'm going to make the claim, some people might debate this, but I really think that overall Google Flights is the best tool to use when searching for flights. Obviously, there's many, many options out there. You can see some of them I mentioned there, Kayak, Expedia, Hopper. They all have some positives to them, and I recommend cross-check. Once you feel like you found a good option through Google Flights, cross-check that through one of these other sites to see if you're finding the same thing. But ultimately, I think Google Flights offers kind of the best suite of tools. And from my experience, it's relatively accurate. And just, yeah, it gives you the best bang for your buck in terms of time on site and the results that it brings back to you. So I have a bunch of other bullet points listed here that I think are actually best demonstrated through going ahead and just opening up the Google Flights page and working our way around and showing you some of the basics there. So let me open this into a new window. So I'm guessing a lot of you maybe have seen this welcome page here for Google Flights. So a few things I want to point out just to start. So in your origin and destination here, one powerful tool, as I mentioned here, can be multiple origins and destinations. And what I mean by that is you can search potentially for multiple origin airports and multiple destination airports at the same time. And that can be a powerful tool to bring back results, better results than just searching a single origin destination pair. So just a quick example, let's say you want to search from DTW, but you also want to search from Chicago. And then you're going to, let's just throw out a random city, Brussels. But if you look at the map, you realize that there's some other airports not that far away, like there may be Amsterdam. So let's try that as well. And then Google often will, if you go actually back to when I just had the single airport there, they offer suggestions for other places that are nearby as well. So if you want to just include all of the nearby destinations, you can just choose the city and it'll cover all three of these. So let's just choose the city. But I'm also going to add Amsterdam because I think that's close by. Let's just throw in some random dates. And see what comes up. Okay, so there's a lot going on here, a lot of information, a lot to take in. I'm just going to kind of guide us through, I think, a few of the most important things to be aware of. First of all, this is actually just a new update in the last few weeks. Any search on Google Flights now, they have these two main tabs at the bottom. They call them best and cheapest. So what they're calling best is what they're considering the best combination of price and convenience, basically. So it's getting you where you want to go relatively quickly and at a relatively good price. The cheapest is just absolute cheapest, no matter how long the trip is, how many connections you have. So for this option, it's really not that big of a difference between the best and the cheapest. You see best is 620, and if you click cheapest, it'll bring up your cheapest options, which is 590. So you can see it's actually not a huge difference here. So we have the cheapest option, which is from Chicago, one stop in Lisbon, going to Brussels. The best option was actually from Detroit, going through Chicago to Brussels. So there's a bunch of things happening here, right? You have, because we search different potential origins, so these flights that it's searching for could be leaving from Detroit or Chicago. You need to look carefully when the results come up. So this will show you actually where the flight is departing from. So these first three flights are all leaving from Detroit, whereas these next two are both leaving from Chicago. So you're going to want to be aware of that. You're also going to want to be aware of the total flight time. So this right here will be your total flight time from your departure city to your destination city, and that's going to be including the layover, which if there is a layover, it'll be listed here. I'm going to go into some more details and things to be aware of on layovers in a minute, but that's kind of the basics in terms of how you're going to be reading this. So you're going to want to factor in a few different things here. Let's say if you are actually living in the Detroit area or still in Ann Arbor when you're going to be doing this trip, obviously leaving from Detroit is going to be the preferred option here. And I would only recommend considering leaving from Chicago or some alternate nearby airport if the price was significantly cheaper. And I really feel like it would have to be significantly cheaper because obviously you're going to have to factor in the cost of getting from Detroit or Ann Arbor to Chicago. So that's going to be a train or bus ticket. It's going to be a subway ride once you get to Chicago to get out to the airport. So you're talking, I think it would have to be like multiple $100s different to be worth it to fly from Chicago if you are actually based here in Ann Arbor. So that's just something to consider in terms of multiple origins and destinations. Next thing here I want to highlight is the date, grid, and price graph. So once you punch in a search option, for every search you do, you will always have these date grid and price graph things that show here. I think of these two, the most useful is the date grid. So if you click there, it will show you kind of a 7-day span on either side. So basically the actual date you chose, and then plus or minus 3 days on each side of all the different combinations of days and what the best flight options are for those days. So you can see for this example, it's not a huge difference, though there are some that actually then dip under 500 here if you departed on December 29th instead of January 1st. So if you see one of these that you're like, oh, actually, I have a little flexibility. I could arrive a few days early. Let's see what that flight is. All you have to do is click on that flight, that day combination, click OK, and it's going to show you what that option was. This case, it's flying from Chicago, and the absolute cheapest has a very long layover. The next one is a slightly shorter layover. So you can kind of play with all the permutations, combinations there. And that's a good way to see what potential dates could work if you do have that flexibility. The next thing I want to highlight is the track prices option. That's going to be right here. So if you turn that on, you will receive emails when prices update for your flights. So if you go here, you can see the dates, all the details for your trip, and then the email that you have associated, with your Google account will receive emails when the costs for that flight significantly change. So if you really want to keep close tabs on it and you still have a little bit of time before you need to purchase your flight, that's going to be a useful tool. And yes, the Explore tool, I'm going to talk about that on a later slide, so I'll leave that for now. But it's a great way to kind of explore different trip ideas if you really have a lot of flexibility and are not sure where you want to be traveling to. Okay. Whoops. Okay. So yeah. Next, I want to talk about a bit more about layovers. So there's a lot to consider with layovers. So firstly, ideally, you can find a nonstop flight to your destination. That's always going to be preferred. It's going to be the shortest trip time. You're going to not have as much of an opportunity for delays, right? So because every stop that you make, that's going to be another chance for the origin or the departure or the arrival to be delayed in some way, for there to be something happening where you're stopping. It could be a weather issue. It could be a ground operation. Any number of different things are going to be more complicated each additional stop that you have on your itinerary. So if you can find a nonstop, that's going to be ideal. That being said, usually nonstops are going to be the most expensive option. So you have to factor in that convenience. Is that worth the extra cost to you? And then obviously for some destinations, there just won't be a nonstop option. We're lucky here in Detroit. We have an airport that does have a lot of international destinations to it. So you can find nonstops from Detroit to a lot of different cities, but I realize that some of you may be departing from other cities as well that might not have as many direct international connections. So um, just something to be aware of. Let's say you're looking at flights and it looks like you can't avoid stopping somewhere. Okay, so there's a lot of things to consider when you're looking at your connection. First of all, how many are there? So I think most of you are going to be wanting to book something that has a maximum of 2 stops. Occasionally, you will see results come in from Google Flights that have 3 or maybe even more. It's probably pretty rare to have more than 3 stops, but you do sometimes see 3 stops. Unless we're talking about a huge savings, 3 stops is usually not going to be something you're going to do. It's going to make for a really long total trip time. And it's like I was saying, it's just going to increase the chances of delays and issues. So you're going to want to do maximum 2. Ideally, only 1 stop is going to be best. Other thing you're going to want to look at with those stops is, where is the stop? Is the stop a domestic connection? So are you flying from Detroit to New York and then New York to your final destination? Or are you flying from Detroit to Frankfurt and then Frankfurt to somewhere else in Europe for your final destination? It's important to think about those because domestic and international transits are quite different. In general, domestic transits are going to be a bit easier. You're not going to have to clear immigration or customs or additional security in a domestic stopover. So if you're just flying from Detroit to New York, you can get straight off your flight in New York, immediately walk to your next gate, hop on your international flight. Because of that, you can get away with a bit shorter layover. Sometimes airlines will allow you to book tickets that only have about an hour layover between flights. If it's a domestic stop, typically that's something that you could get away with. Of course, your inbound flight could be delayed and you would have an issue, but usually an hour would be sufficient for a domestic itinerary. Whereas for an international itinerary, if you're booking a flight that was only giving you an hour and 15 minutes to transfer. So let's say you're flying from Detroit to Amsterdam, and then your final destination is in Prague, and your itinerary only has you with about an hour in Amsterdam. That's going to be dangerous in terms of risking missing that connection. So that's going to be something you're going to want to consider, especially if maybe it's your first time traveling internationally, you're not as confident navigating an airport and immigration and how all of that works. You're going to want to make sure that you're building in some more time for an international layover. So definitely keep that in mind. When I say same airport here, this is a bit more unusual, but you will see it sometimes. You will sometimes see search results come back on Google Flights where you are actually transferring from one airport to a different airport in that same city before you continue with your itinerary. Those flights are often going to be quite a bit cheaper because they're something that most people are not going to want to do, and it's not something that I would recommend you do. Again, it would have to be a gigantic cost savings for that to be worth it. And you would need to make sure that you had a lot of time in that city to get from one airport to another airport in that city. So it's generally something I'm not going to recommend you try to do. The other thing you're going to want to consider with your connection is, are you connecting to a different airline, or are you connecting with the same airline or at least the same partner with that airline? So again, I'll use that example of our Detroit to Amsterdam flight. Let's say that's on Delta. And then in Amsterdam, often when you buy a ticket on Delta, your European flight from Amsterdam to wherever you're going in Europe it won't be on Delta, it'll be on their partner airline, which in that case would usually be KLM. That's totally fine because they're partners, they're working together, they have your itinerary synced, so it should work. And should you miss that connection in Amsterdam, usually they'll very easily accommodate you and get you on the next flight to your destination. However, if you're laying over and it's completely different airlines, maybe even different tickets, you're going to be at risk if you miss that connection, that second flight, it's not going to be taken care of by you. It's not going to be taken care of for you by that second airline. Because they're not partners, they're not communicating with each other. They don't really have an incentive to accommodate you should you miss that connection. So you're going to want to be careful, making sure that you are actually connected with the same airline or airline partner. If you're not sure if two airlines are partners, usually if you book a flight through the airline directly and it's just one ticket, it will be with an airline partner, even if that second flight is on a different named airline. So like in that example I just gave, you'll buy your ticket through Delta. It'll be completely through Delta, even though that second flight is on KLM, because KLM is their partner. Finally, a couple things here. You want to make sure you're looking at your total travel time. So in this result, this total travel time here, you will often find that the flights that pop up in this cheapest category are going to have longer total flight times. And that's most often because you will have a very long layover, which if you have the time and the flexibility and you don't mind having to hang out in the airport for 8 hours to save $150, $200 because you're on a really cheap budget, I would say go for it if you're up for that. It's ultimately kind of going to be that cost benefit analysis that you're going to have to do to decide if that extra travel time is worth it to save a bit of money. And then finally, this is really important for anyone who is traveling on international flights. And for a lot of the destinations where we have programs, you're going to be doing some type of overnight flight. So for Europe, typically you're going to be leaving North America in the evening and arriving in Europe in the morning. So you will be arriving one calendar day later. And you're going to want to factor that into your planning for when you need to arrive for your program, right? So if your program starts January 15th, you need to arrive there by the 14th. You're going to need to be leaving the US by the 13th. It gets even more extreme when you're traveling to Asia. So I have an example here of flights from Detroit to Sydney. See how it says in really small print here, +2, leaves Detroit 3:50 on the 15th, arrives there at 8:35 a.m. +2 on Friday, January 17th. That means it's arriving 2 calendar days later than you're departing the United States. So you just have to work backwards, right? So if you need to arrive there by the 15th, you're not going to be able to depart Detroit on the 15th. You're going to have to back that up a few days and make sure that at the latest you're departing the US by the 13th to get there by the 15th. So make sure you factor in those days because those layovers can really add up. Any questions so far on what I've talked about? I've been talking a lot. I don't see any questions in chat. Okay, if there's no questions, then I will go ahead, talk a bit about basic economy. So as you're going through your flight search, you'll eventually will get to the page. Let's just pick a few flights here. Let's say we want to do this Delta flight, and then we need to pick our return flight, and eventually you'll get to a page that looks like this. So for most airlines, most tickets that you're going to be looking at, there's going to be these different ticket types, I'll call them, that you're going to have to choose from. And typically you'll have the cheapest option, which most airlines call something equivalent to basic economy. Then you have kind of just the main economy option. Delta calls it main cabin. And then you have like a premium economy option, which I'm guessing most of you are probably not going to be doing. So you're going to have to be looking at these two options and deciding if it's worth the extra cost. So Google does a really nice job here of showing you what is and is not included for this basic economy option. Usually the biggest difference is going to be this checked bag fee. So checked bag fees are almost always going to be included in just like a standard economy ticket. Usually you're going to get one free carry-on, one free checked bag. But in the basic economy, at least for the US airlines, usually a checked bag is not going to be included and you're going to have to pay extra for that. So it's going to be a total of 150 extra round trip if you're flying basic economy and you need to use a checked bag for this itinerary. So you can do the math. You can add 150 to 889 and see if that, how that weighs out. It's still going to be less than this 1129 option. There are a few other things that basic economy tickets restrict that you should be aware of. You won't be able to select your seat. And probably the next most important thing after the checked bag fee is going to be potential fees. So if you need to change your ticket, you will have to pay an additional fee on basic economy. Whereas on the main cabin option, you won't have to pay a fee, though you might have to pay a difference if the ticket you're changing to is a more expensive fare than the original that you had purchased. So definitely make sure that you think through these options and figure out what's best for you. Typically, the flights that Google displays when you're first searching, they're almost always just going to show you the cheapest, like basic economy option. So if you know you need to use a checked bag for your trip, which obviously if you're doing a study abroad program, you're going to need a checked bag. You're going to have to make sure that you're mentally, even before you get to that page, knowing that this cost is probably not going to reflect the full cost because you're going to have to add in at a minimum that checked bag fee. So just keep that in mind. Okay, next I want to move on to the Explore tool. This is going to be something that is through Google Flights, and it's most likely not going to be something that you would use when you're looking for your flight to your study abroad program destination, because this Explorer tool is something that you're going to want to use more for if you're exploring just potential options and you have a lot of flexibility in terms of where you would be up for going to and your dates. So you can do it like this. Let's say you are studying abroad in Madrid. And you can intentionally leave the where to section blank. And then let's say you want to do a weekend trip in March. You can set it like that. And you're probably going to want to move off of North America here, move over to Europe. And this will really neatly show you all the different options for flying from Madrid over a weekend in the month of March and what the prices would be for those different options. And then as you zoom in or out, it'll show you different destinations. So you kind of have to play with the zoom level. The most zoomed out option will limit what it shows. But let's just look around. Let's see what looks interesting. It's like, maybe I'd be interested in going to Copenhagen for a week. So you click on that, and over on the left here, it shows you a bunch of useful things. It'll show you the potential flights for that destination. And if you want to view the flights for that destination in the full flight view, you just click View Flights. It'll open up a new tab. And then you have your typical flight option. It also will show you a few other, I think, pretty useful things. It'll show you hotels, and then it'll show you typical weather where you're going to be going. You might look at this and be like, typical weather in Copenhagen in March doesn't look that nice. Maybe I would rather go somewhere in Southern Europe. So maybe I'd like to go to Rome for the weekend instead. You can look at same flight options for Rome. Look at the weather. Oh, the weather looks nicer in Rome. And actually in March, it's off season, so it might be less popular and lower prices. So I think it's just a really nicely curated way that you can kind of just sit back and explore all your different options And again, this is best for if you're just kind of looking for ideas, and you want to kind of combine ideas with some realistic idea of, what the cost would be to get there. So I think it's a super useful tool. Okay, let's go ahead and practice with a demo. I realize it's already 40 after. So does anybody have a destination and dates that we would like to sample with? Oh, someone already was ready to go here. Okay. Detroit to Madrid, January 16th to June 4th. Okay, let's see what comes up. For now, I'm just going to leave Detroit as the only origin. We can maybe add some additional options after our initial search, but let's just search Detroit for now. And then Madrid, I believe Madrid really only has one major airport. Some cities have definitely like 2 or 3 potential airport options. Like London has multiple airports, Paris does, I believe Rome does. But Madrid, I think, just has this one. So we'll just choose that, and then we'll adjust our dates here. 16th to June 4th. Okay, so it looks like for the best options, it's showing a bit over 1,000 here. And before I go into those, let's see what the details are for this cheapest option at 864. Okay, it's this one down here. I've often found this Portuguese airline often has some of the cheapest options to Europe, but you typically do have to make additional connections. So you kind of have to weigh here. Does this, about a little over $200 savings, is it worth adding an additional stop to your flight? The other thing that you're also going to want to be aware of is these flights that you're looking at when the search first comes up, these are only your departing flights. So you don't know what the details are going to be for your return flights and your return flight options until you click this departing option. So let's go ahead and try this cheapest option and see what the return options are. See, this is where you kind of get to maybe why this is the cheapest option, because you can see the return. You're looking at a 26-hour return, which is about a 4-hour layover in Lisbon and then a super long overnight layover in Boston. So you'd be landing in Boston 8 in the evening, and then you wouldn't be departing until 8 the next morning. So I'm guessing if we go back to what Google was considering the best option, you wouldn't have to deal with like a super long layover like that. So let's go back, change our departure, and try one of these, what they're calling best options. Let's try this first one. So it's Detroit. Let me go look at it again. It's Detroit through Charlotte. And you have about a 2-hour connection, which should be totally fine. And then returning. See, these are much better return options. So you have from 11 to 17-hour total trip time returning, all for the same price. So if you click that one, again, then you get to this page where you're going to have the basic economy and main cabin decision. So about $200 difference here. The check bag alone will get you to about $50 difference. And then you kind of just have to decide if it's worth it for those additional $50 to be able to pick your seat and potentially have no fees if you do want to change your ticket. On this basic economy, you wouldn't be able to change it at all. So if you had to change your flight for any reason, it's not going to be possible. So those look like those would be the best options for this specific itinerary. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Didn't notice. I didn't mention this, but you may have noticed, I just find this kind of interesting. They have also in the last few years added in this emissions category, which is calculating what they see the total CO2 emissions are for this routing. And typically, it's going to have lower projected emissions if there's fewer stops. So usually a nonstop will have the lowest emissions. And then I think the next most important factor is the actual type of aircraft that they're using on the flight. So um, newer planes are more fuel efficient typically. I know the newest options from Boeing and Airbus are quite a bit more fuel efficient than the older planes. So that's just something to consider if it's important to you. You could also factor that into your decision. Let's try one more. A bit of an extreme case. Detroit to LGA. Oh, okay. Okay. We're going to try a domestic option here. Okay. We can try that. January 25th to 26th. So I can tell you right off the top that flying into and out of um, New York has three main airports. Um, LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark. So I would almost by default, when you're searching flights to or from New York, just choose New York here, which will include all three of those airports. If for some reason it's really important to you to fly in or out one of those airports, maybe it's just much closer to your final destination, you can restrict it. But I think in terms of cost saving, you're almost always going to save a fair amount if you open up all three airports as an option. Um, so yeah, the biggest variable I think for like an itinerary like this is going to be your time of day. So you can see it looks like flights leaving early in the morning are going to be the cheapest options, though it's not a huge difference actually later in the day too. Um, I would guess because this is only a one-day trip, you're not going to need a checked bag, so that'll definitely save you money. The thing to be aware of for some of these ultra low-cost airlines like Spirit is they're also often going to restrict your carry-on bag size as well. So if you click through, oh, okay, actually this is interesting. So you see what happened there. I clicked on the Spirit departing flight. And then on the returning flights, the cheapest ones that were actually that cheap price, it's actually on a different airport for the return. And you see how it says separate tickets? You'll buy each ticket in this itinerary separately. So that is actually requiring you to buy two separate tickets. And on the return, it's not going to be nonstop. It's going to be through Orlando or Dallas or Atlanta. So that's quite a bit different and maybe not worth that $50 savings in terms of just being able to fly nonstop back with one ticket on the same airline. If you click through to the final page here, you'll see they often list multiple booking options. So like I said at the top, I always recommend booking directly with the airline if you can, if the prices are similar. Here, the prices are identical, so there's absolutely no reason why you wouldn't book directly with the airline. But it'll list lots of these other online travel agencies where you can book from. And sometimes for more complicated international itineraries, these online agencies can be cheaper, and you'll just have to weigh whether it's worth it to you to save a little money to buy from one of those online agencies. Any questions or thoughts about what we were looking at there? Chicago to Singapore, sure. Chicago to Singapore, Jan 7th to May 16th. Great, thanks for joining. Yeah, if anyone needs to run, please go ahead. Okay, so Chicago to Singapore. Interesting. Okay, so it looks like the cheapest option here is really not that much different from the best. I don't know why they're saying that um, this Turkish airline option is the best. That seems really strange to me. It's a 10-hour layover and it's not. and that much cheaper. It's not cheaper at all, really. So that's odd. That feels like a mistake. Um, but this cheapest option, like on Cathay Pacific, it's a little bit of a long layover in Hong Kong. Um, but it's significantly cheaper. So, I mean, my initial thought is that looks like the best option. So let's see what the return flight options look like if we choose that departure. Ah, okay, there we go. That's why this one is not as ideal because the return flight you have almost a full day layover in Hong Kong, which actually um Hong Kong's a really interesting city. So if you had some flexibility on your way back, you could you could spend the night in Hong Kong, take the bus into the city and explore a little bit. But if you didn't want to have to deal with something like that, um, looks like this Cathay Pacific option is not going to be the best. So you might want to go back to your departure, avoid Cathay Pacific, and then let's see if you choose this Turkish option, what the return flights are like. Actually, that's pretty good. So it's one stop each way in Istanbul. It's a little bit of a short connection in Istanbul, but it is all with the same airline. So you should be protected there if for some reason you didn't make that layover. They should be able to accommodate you on their next flight. So my initial thought is probably that Turkish option is going to be the best option, unless you wanted to check out Hong Kong for an evening, which I would recommend. Hong Kong's a super interesting city. Um, yeah, I guess that's my initial take. Cool. Okay. Anyone else have questions? I think that's basically what I wanted to cover. Again, I totally love this stuff. So have you had any other, questions or itineraries that you need some additional help with? Feel free to send them my way. I don't have all day to play travel agent, but I'm totally up for a few here and there taking a look at. I got a question here about the risks of purchasing tickets from a third-party website. Um, I would say just the main risk, and it might not even be so much a risk as just a potential for additional fees. And that's because if you have to change your flight and you haven't booked it directly with the airline, not only will you maybe have to pay a fee with the airline, but you may also have to pay a change fee that the online travel agency charges as well. So again, like a lot of these decisions, it's going to be kind of like cost benefit, like risk analysis. So if buying the same itinerary through an online travel agent, was hundreds of dollars cheaper, it may be worth that risk. That's ultimately going to be a decision you'll have to make. Um, but just in general, if the prices are similar, I recommend going directly through the airline. I know that there are some online travel agencies that are a little bit less well known. I wonder if we can bring up any of them here. Let's just like build a random itinerary and see. Yeah, so like this itinerary, it's showing, 15 different places you can book. And some of these are more well known, Expedia, Priceline, Travelocity, Student Universe. I'm familiar with those. I would trust those as legitimate. Some of these are I've never heard of before, and I'm pretty familiar with these things and I've never heard of them. And if sometimes if I haven't heard of one before, I will Google it, just like what is is Atom Vacations legitimate? And you can kind of see what people have to say about it. I mean, I know when you go that route, often will see negative comments because people are only commenting on, a service if they had a bad experience. But I would generally stay away from those more kind of like unknown agencies just because I feel like they're more likely to not be, as reputable and maybe have additional hidden fees, things like that, that they could throw at you. Okay, any other questions? I'm gonna stop the recording.